Welcome everyone to the 10-Tender 10-2 Virtual Artist Talk Series. Today's speaker is Amal Ishaque. Pronouns are they and them. They are a multidisciplinary artist, pushcart nominated poet, and award-winning educator living on the unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Their writing has been published in various literary journals and anthologies, including 𝙩𝙚𝙣𝙙, forthcoming this fall, Queer and Muslim on Faith, Family, and Healing, and The World That Belongs to Us, an anthology of queer poetry from South Asia. Resistance art has been central in Amal's organizing. Their art practice moves across disciplines, visioning liberatory collective futures. Recent projects include a 3-year arts residency about housing justice and a large-scale public art piece highlighting racialized histories and interconnected futures. Amal has been organizing at the intersecting front lines of Palestine solidarity, disability justice, and anti-pinkwashing resistance for over 2 decades, along with involvement in multiple other movements. They are a co-founder of Queers Against Israeli Apartheid and Marble Mutual Aid Network. Welcome, Amal. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? We're good? Okay.
We're good.
Yeah. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. I know that we had a bunch of people signed up. I know the sun is also shining, so we have competition after so many days of rain, but I'm just happy to be here with those of you who are here with me today. Right people and the right number of people show up at the right time is kind of a facilitation principle that I learned early in my career as a popular educator. And so I really love that concept. So my name is Amal, and my pronouns, as Claire has shared, are they and them. And my talk today is called Clustering into Collective Care. And I really want to orient into the theme that, Claire has so beautifully laid out for us around 10, tender, and 10-2. And I think of clustering into collective care in terms of monarch butterflies, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But I also wanted to mention this is the name of a new creative nonfiction essay. It's a hybrid essay that I wrote that includes poetry for a forthcoming anthology that is available for pre-order now, called Queer and Muslim, which Claire mentioned in my bio, Queer and Muslim on Faith, Family, and Healing. And as I was mentioning, this concept of clustering is inspired by monarch butterflies that I saw in Central California years ago at Pismo Beach on a road trip. They cluster together in large numbers to protect each other from buffeting winds and cold on their migration while they're on their migration path. So this is usually on the trunk of a tree. And I just have, really been taken with this concept of ever since I saw the butterflies doing this, and I think kind of tying into kind of frameworks such as emergent strategy. But I think of monarchs tend, they tend to each other, they're tending, they're tender. There's this beautiful tenderness in this mutual act of collective survival. And right now, of course, more than ever, and it always seems to be the case, but particularly it feels certainly at this moment, we're currently in a time where the urgency of collective survival is really being thrust upon us. So it seemed like an appropriate title for this talk. And I saw your story, I think it was yesterday, Claire, which I really also appreciated around, further deepening this idea of to tend, to look after, watch over, care for, so quoting your words, to be disposed or inclined in action to do something soft or delicate in substance or quality, apply one's attention. And so this reminds me of the absolute urgent need of care work between us. So I wanted to, of course, start off by, doing like the land acknowledgement and also talking about, I'm really heeding the call. I don't know if it's a call, but, the kinds of reflections I've seen from many Indigenous people, including people I know, about the hollowness of land acknowledgement. So trying to deepen that while understanding this is, of course, imperfect as a settler And so I do want to start by saying that I am on unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories. Specifically, I am at 𝙩𝙬𝙣𝙙. And, I think in terms of my role as a Muslim settler, it's so important to name that. I strive, this is something that I put out there, even, in terms of like with every email that I send out. As a settler, I strive to be in solidarity with Indigenous communities as a tangible, lifelong commitment and an aspiration. And I think the key is striving and aspiring, because I don't feel that I can just self-declare that I'm in solidarity. And it is a commitment of a lifetime, in many ways, very imperfect and messy, but continued striving to actual action on multiple front lines, including when unpermitted bulldozers, for example, run by developers, started digging up sacred ancestral remains of a specific sacred 𝙩𝙬𝙣𝙙 midden site on Marine Drive, which was in 2012, and here in so-called Marpole. And like many here, I joined the protest. And, we took food and cornbread and other things to the front lines, because beginning particularly was women and youth running those protests. And more recently, as part of Marpole Mutual Aid, we went and taped back together Musqueam banners at the same site that had been slit in half and defaced with racist messages. And we went and attached, we created these hearts made out of chloroplast, red hearts, and put messages of support for our Musqueam neighbors to ensure that they understood that they had our full support, and that, we hadn't forgotten the history either. So this banner that you see here in this picture was on many front lines in support of Wet'suwet'en, and what was happening in terms of land back and Indigenous land and water defenders. It's been on rail tracks. It was on rail tracks at the time. It was down near the port, and it's pictured here downtown with my movement sibling, Usman, Muslim sibling Usman, who's also holding it. And, I'm also thinking about being at another protest for Wet'suwet'en with Usman and the banner, I think at Hastings. And he had shared with me later that he was racially profiled and harassed and threatened by police on his way out of the protests, leaving with his children. So I also, I'm thinking about, parenting and what it means to parent during these times, and what it means to, both cluster together in face of danger. And a nod to also Claire, who's teaches us so many beautiful ways in terms of how parenting is care work and community work and collective care. So the photos of the banner circulated on social media, and Muslim youth and aunties and more and others messaged to bring these conversations about what Muslim solidarity with Indigenous land and water defenders meant to their communities. And I think that was like a really kind of important reminder for me to continue. And, it's something I've always done, but to once again continue to expand the idea of what a frontline is. So physically, front lines can be on the streets, but also at kitchen tables, the masjid floors, the Islamic schools, the one-on-ones with the uncles and aunties and the parents and more of a generation that hasn't had access and the privilege often too of the education and even the interactions and the types of learning we've been able to do thanks to our Indigenous kin. So I just wanted to kind of give that nod to like where this led and how important it is because of the labor of Indigenous communities and particularly land and water defenders, what kind of catalyst that has been for conversations that I've seen and actions and shifting in Muslim communities in particular. So as Claire mentioned, spring equinox, Nowruz and Eid happening all at the same time. Right now, my heart is with Sudan and Palestine, people in the MENA region, and most especially migrant workers who, even as bombs fall, are being refused shelter in places like Lebanon, or dying as workers from bombs dropping in return on Gulf country targets. This is an issue dear to my heart because, my family, I grew up in a migrant worker family and was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. I also wanted to, take a moment to think about Iran and Afghanistan, Kurdistan, Congo, Rohingya and Uyghur genocides, Kashmir, of course, Turtle Island and the ongoing settler colonial machine violating Indigenous self-determination here on a daily basis, minute by minute, and so many other struggles that I just, we could spend the day and lifetimes talking about. So March 21st, of course, is also the date of the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa. On 21st March 1960, 69 people died and 180 were wounded when police fired on a peaceful crowd that had gathered in protest against the apartheid pass laws. And March 21st for me also then as a result is really significant because it was the date in which a Muslim woman friend and I organized what, as far as we know, was one of the first ever campus-wide anti-racism rallies at UVic on Lekwungen and Wasanich territories as undergrad students to commemorate actually the Sharpeville massacre and the International Day for the Elimination of Racism. So I wanted to move from that in terms of situating myself in the land and my relationship to the land and my responsibilities as a settler to come back again, to circle back as I will throughout this talk to the framework of 10, tender, and 10-2. And before I speak more about the intersections of my art and organizing practices, I wanted to situate myself also in terms of the lineages and kinships that have both grown the roots of this work and tended to me and tended to my work one way or another. So I would say my artistic canons, people talk about their literary canon, is made of these people and others, not necessarily, the art elite or published writers or people with literary prizes, but people who are, off and by community, a kinship built on webs of care and tending. So this is my father, and I want to start with him. This is us on the beach in LA, where we lived after moving from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on temporary status. And we're at the beach, Huntington Beach, and I think I'm about 16 in this picture. And this is him tired from working at auto parts store that they owned. And my love for poetry comes from my Pakistani Muslim father. Since I was a young child, he recited, he had memorized and had learned in school both poetry in Urdu and in Farsi, which was what happened in the schools back then in Pakistan. And so I grew up with him reciting the poetry of Allama Iqbal, Faz Ahmed Faz, Maulana Rumi, and others from memory. And this was, this is a tradition we continue today. And I think that's where my love from poetry and the genesis for my own poetry came from. Oops, wrong way. So I wanted to also, acknowledge my mother, who is a deeply gifted visual artist, a painter. She dreamed of going to going to get a graduate degree in the arts and going to art school, but her father refused to let her go. This was at the time in Pakistan, so she had to pursue other education. And this was, I think, a significant heartbreak for her. And I remember that she helped me through high school with my tougher assignments from the occasional art class that I took, her gift always shining through, even though she was just like helping me so casually. And I tried for years even now, to try and get her, buy her supplies, get her to paint again, because she was such a prolific painter from everything I hear, although I've never seen her paintings. And only a small amount of her other work. But I think the grief is just too much. And I wanted to name that is part of tending to and tenderness in naming the ways in which grief also inform my art practice. So in terms of thinking about kinships and lineages, I wanted to also mention, Claire, you and I have spoken about my, long time kind of framing, or perhaps I should call it an embodied practice of movement aunties. And something that all of my art and organizing work, I think, is deeply anchored in is this concept of movement aunties and this framework of movement aunties. And I love that we're here today through the platform of United Aunties and the kind of connections that we've both seen and the intersections and the overlaps between the ways in which we see aunties and how we are aunties in our communities and in our art practices has been really moving for me. So movement aunties for me transcends gender and blood ties. They're the nurturers and the warriors of our movements. They embody what it means to tend, to be tender and tend to. And it's interesting to see the framework of Auntie, I think, kind of shift and change and be embraced by younger folks across, and beyond the gender spectrum. And at the same time, I think that there has been this vilification of aunties of a certain age as old hags, evil, plotting, judgmental, and tied to convention. And so I think for me, there's a reclamation that's very important here. And so I wanted to say that I've been blessed with a couple of incredible movement aunties who are no longer with us, but these women have been central for me in my art and organizing practice. So I wanted to acknowledge Philippa Ryan on the right at the very top. This is the only picture. There's very few pictures of her. She's been gone from us for a long time now. She was a Gitsan elder in the downtown east side who was involved with movement organizing at multiple levels, very different struggles. And she had a way of just showing up when you needed her most. Just like it felt like out of thin air, and she could see deeply into people's souls. She was seminal to me, and I was honored to call her both a friend and I would say a mentor. And below that is a picture of myself and a Baha'i brother with, another movement auntie of mine who's passed not long ago, or doesn't feel that way anyways. Victoria Marie, or Vicky as we knew her, who was a rebel reverend, organizer, poet, artist, an activist, and also a DTS, Downtown East Side elder. And so her guidance is something that I always carry with me. This is us on Burnaby Mountain, invited by Swalotooth Watch House for a day of faith with interfaith community members right before she was arrested while she was fighting cancer on the front lines. And so a moment for me that was really important. So I wanted to move into talking a little bit about my different aspects of my art practice, and starting with what I would call, I think, I often refer to that my work is oriented towards creating and visioning and creating liberatory new futures that are collective. And so with that, I wanted to talk about how I've been inspired by Black Afrofuturists in particular, like Walida Imarisha. And this is a quote from her in the introduction to the Octavia's Brut anthology, which was an anthology that for me has been very seminal, and it was used in the curriculum for Tomorrow is Ours, which was one of the first BIPOC Futurisms writing workshop series that happened in the city a number of years ago that I co-facilitated with Indigiqueer poet and friend Joe Billows. And so I just wanted to read this quote. So, I like that Walida kind of shifts the frame in terms of moving from speculative fiction or science fiction, talks about how visionary fiction is a term we developed to distinguish science fiction that has relevance towards building new, freer worlds from the mainstream strain of science fiction, which most often reinforces dominant narratives of power. Visionary fiction encompasses all of the fantastic, with the arc always bending towards justice. We believe this space is vital for any process of decolonization, because the decolonization of the imagination is the most dangerous and subversive form there is. For it is where all other forms of decolonization are born. Once the imagination is unshackled, liberation is limitless. And particularly this last line has been a guiding thread in my work. So on that note, speaking of speculative liberatory futures and visionary fiction, I feel like that term can also be applied in terms of visionary art, moving towards future-oriented art making and art creation that centers collective liberation. And so these are just some examples of my work. I've been emerging more. Most of my art practice through the years has been as a poet, but I've been emerging slowly and dipping my toe into visual arts. And so digital collage and other forms of collage are one aspect of that, and other digital art. And so the first picture I'm showing here is called South Sudan Rising. It's a digital portrait of Monica Deng, my South Sudanese sister resistor, who I met during my 3-year housing justice arts residency that I finished and wrapped up last year. So behind Monica is a futuristic moon, which appears also as a halo, as a nod to Mughal miniatures, which have often a halo around saintly figures. And also, similarly, we see a type of halo in early depictions of Christian saints, which is a nod to Monica, who is Christian, and to her community, who are specifically centered in South Sudan. And below her is a star map of South Sudan, and beside it is honeysuckle, which is the national flower of Sudan. And in the foreground is kente cloth, which was, which references a moment that I had with Monica and another incredible Black community leader and artist who I met through this residency, Margaret, and the three of us, after a really heavy art making session in Moody Park in New West, filled with a lot of grief, with people sharing stories, had a moment of lightness in the park because they were admiring these kente cloth earrings I had gotten from the African Descent Festival. And we were just having a moment. I was admiring their style and their accessories, and we were laughing. And so I wanted to also bring in that joy in that moment that we had as we bonded as, siblings. So the next photo is one you may have seen before. This is Imam Hendricks. He was one of the world's first openly gay imams. I had the honor of meeting him in South Africa and praying with him at his humble queer Muslim masjid in Cape Town when I was there attending a decolonial studies graduate program. Unfortunately, he was assassinated last year, and this quote by him is on top, framing him. The heart is not big enough to contain both fear and faith. And this was a reference to the fact that he knew that he had these death threats and that he was in danger most of his life. And he still continued his work and saved many lives. So he's on top of Table Mountain, and below him are the national flower of South Africa, King Protea. And above him are twin images of Barak. And so Barak was a celestial steed who carried the Prophet Muhammad to the heavens. And was often, in modern times, it's been depicted very much as male, but Barak in early renditions was depicted as gender fluid or female, or, blurring genders in various ways. So I really wanted to bring Barak in as, to me, a symbol of like queer and trans Muslimness. At the top left corner, there's a celestial queer masjid with a queer Muslim flag, and in my heart's eye, Imam Hendricks and all of the other shaheeds, the martyrs, queer and trans Muslim martyrs, are there praying together. And in the background is a geomagnetic storm which causes aurora. So lastly, for this, group of artworks, I wanted to share that I grew up with stories of jinn encounters in my family. And so what you see here is matriarchal jinn wolves on a speck of land with arbutuses, which are one of my favorite trees, and how I connect to the land, unceded territories here. And there's a jinn fire that burns in front of them, and a forest that is floating between the worlds. So this is inspired by the poem Constellations Are for the Tame, which was published in Poetry is Dead, in the Coven issue, and then republished in Fold magazine. So I just wanted to read the poem, and then I'll talk about some other aspects of my work. Constellations are for the tame. Our ancestors, those matriarchs of jinn fire and blood, lope through interplanetary forests, triggering geomagnetic storms. For the briefest moment, their splendor shimmers earthly skies. We fall to our knees, bask in the reflected glory, name them Aurora. And I don't know if you've heard, but last night was supposed to be a very good night for the Aurora. I didn't manage to catch it, but I just obviously have a fixation on both jinn and Aurora. So I wanted to share this poem as well, which has for me come back, and it's been a kind of a beautiful, I think, kind of like journey to visualize it and to have it be depicted through visual art. So I just wanted to check in on time, Claire, because I know we started a bit later, and so my time cues are a bit off. Can you let me know how we're doing?
It is 12:33.
Yes. You started
I
around
think we're
12?
good for time.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, you keep going, and I think we'll squeak in there. Okay.
All right, let's see how it goes. Okay, so wanted to move on to talking a little bit about this. I mentioned in the last, when I was showing the work with Monica, that I had a 3-year arts residency, and it was on housing justice called Changing the Conversation with the City of New West, Arts Council of New West, Poverty Reduction Coalition, Douglas College, and other partners. And I had the honor of collaborating with community members with current experiences of housing justice and other intersecting realities, such as war back home in South Sudan, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, poverty, disability, queerness, and more. So we met for weekly art making sessions outside at Moody Park, which was, worked really well for me in terms of accessibility as an immunocompromised person with the pandemic still continuing. And this is a really working class part of New West that I've absolutely fallen in love with a large racialized population, including Black and Indigenous and other racialized people, including many newcomers, many children, a really vibrant place. And so I mentored community members who I learned from. So I would say it was more a lateral mentorship, a concept that I really embrace in all of my work. We created art together. They created a number of art pieces, poetry, broadsides, and visual art. And also they learned how to create labels. I collaborated with them to write bios, etc. So kind of took them to the whole process, because I think this is the piece that's often missing, is these kinds of like, you know, almost like there's like this kind of like, I will call it a gate into like those kind of like insider pieces of knowledge. There's like, okay, we can make art together, but like, how do you put on a show? How do you mount an exhibit? Things I had to learn. How do you write a label? What does a bio look like? So I thought this was really important that this knowledge be shared and passed on. And the art has shown in various places. It's a traveling exhibit. And I'll just talk about a few of the pieces. So their work, the exhibit centers their work with a few pieces of mine combined together. And so these are just highlighting a few of my pieces, and also I'll talk about the collaborations that have happened here. So in the middle is an eviction notice. And this was given to the Marpole encampment that you may have heard of, that was evicted a few years back. We were there for eviction defense as part Marpole Mutual Aid Network, and Stop the Sweeps also joined us for a really beautiful partnership, working with people, the residents in the encampment, to help defend it as much as we could. Unfortunately, there was an eviction that did happen. This is a large poetry broadside that was displayed amongst other places at City Hall at New West, which I thought was really interesting and powerful. And so this is a literal picture of the eviction notice itself with the pieces blacked out. And then basically, I'll just read it. It says, British Columbia trespass notice to the province of British Columbia. As an occupier, you are hereby notified that your entry and use of the land is prohibited, and you are directed to leave the land. If you do not leave the land, you'll be trespassing, which is an offense to the land. Your immediate compliance with this notice is required. And so, we see these notices everywhere. And so I wanted to kind of think about this, and put all the feelings that, not only I was feeling, but really the grief of the residents that they had shared with us into this piece in a way that was visual. So to the right is a photo I took on site while the eviction was happening, called The Push, is what I named it after. And it shows Marpole Mutual Aid members, the tiny homeowner who was one of the people evicted, one of the first residents who had been there the longest of the encampment, and others pushing this tiny home through deep mud on eviction day to try to get it towed and saved. There were cops around, there was so much happening. It was a very, very stressful day. And I have permission of the tiny homeowner to use this photo and others. So they've been in exhibits because he wanted this story to be told. He had put so much love and last of his, tiny bit of inheritance that he had received and all of his labor into building this home. So on the left are photos of my sign art, which says, it's a piece of, line from a poem. This cruel, cruel city somehow grows angels in its midst. And this was a line that was that came to me when we were again moving the home in pouring rain after it had been evicted once again, this time from rail tracks in Marpole to a community member's home who had offered to help. And we needed support, so we put out the word, and on short notice, we had Chinatown Together members who showed up to help move the tiny home while it was Lunar New Year, while they had been celebrating with their family. And we really just, for me, that was just, again, such a deeply moving moment of, to tend to and tending to each other and tenderness. And so that's where the line was originally inspired by, and also by so many other people who helped in so many ways throughout this whole really, really difficult time. And so below are the sign in both of these pictures that you see are giant wings created by Irv, who's with us today. Irv Newcomb, my longtime co-conspirator, collaborator, and Marpole Mutual Aid co-founder. And these are made of upcycled wings, upcycled plastic, and inspired by the sign and my poem Yearning, which I'll share in a minute. So this, became like an installation that with the pieces in conversation with each other throughout the exhibit and in other art exhibits where I've shared it. And so these are photos of, in the top, Monica and Margaret, myself with Bev Ho, a dear friend from Yarrow Society, and Irv, and below my dear friend Rome, who's also a founder of the Radical Access Mapping Project, and a longtime co-conspirator in Kwaya. So I'm just going to share the poem, and it's called Yearning. And this is, where I think the wings were somewhat inspired by and are in conversation with the sign. So Yearning. We contain ourselves in houses for safety, build neighborhoods of gated imagination, put up no trespassing signs, rezoning our souls into private property, keeping each other out to avoid looking in. Yet when we see ravens barrel roll in ungovernable joy, we cannot bury the flutter of yearning. So this poem was a broadside that's also been shared in these housing justice exhibits. So of course, if I'm going to talk about the housing, this residency, I cannot separate that from Marpole Mutual Aid. And the two really have become, I think, became inseparable through the last 3 years. And Marpole Mutual Aid Network started in Ramadan in 2021, in the early days of the pandemic, which continues to impact people. And we saw elders, disabled people, people with kids lining up for hours down the street at the local food bank, at the local church close by for hours. And so that kind of inspired the beginning of what started as a pantry and became many other things. And I think I just want to kind of take a moment to talk about how mutual aid is not a Western concept. Yes, there are a lot of white people who have written books and have theory on mutual aid, and it's not to in any way denigrate that, but to kind of just name and reclaim mutual aid as, part of our traditions as people of the global majority, as racialized people, as BIPOC communities. And, drawing upon what Sikh neighbors have shared with me about the kind of tradition of seva, and for me, the Muslim lineage of zakat, while they may not be exactly translatable, I think there are many lessons that I've drawn. And I think that in practicing these things and sharing with and having conversations with Sikh and Muslim friends, we've been able to take from those kinds of lessons that we learned and translate them into the mutual aid work that we do today. So the pantry has text in Swahili, Spanish, Tagalog, Punjabi, Farsi, Arabic, and Spanish, and Tamil, and there's more to come. And it's open 24/7. There's no policing, no shaming. And, we started it partly, I think, inspired by our own experiences of food insecurity and poverty in the past. And particularly for me, that meant including period products, because I used to have to be in a place as a queer youth to have to really choose between food and having things like period products. So, period poverty really does exist. And we've grown beyond the pantry, as I mentioned, encampment defense, frontline direct support, getting a warming and cooling emergency weather response shelter in the area, misting stations, senior supports, fundraising for migrant families in need, education, and so much more. And the art aspect of this has blended seamlessly, as I mentioned, with the housing justice residency. And this work has created networks of tending and collective care with others throughout the city. Here's an example. You can see there's Bev appearing again. She's going to get mad. I know she was supposed to be here today, but I know she's also doing CD Saturdays. She's probably going to be like, why do you have so many pictures of me? This is Bev and Celine from Yarrow Society, who have been early supporters, Yarrow Society, of the pantry and Marpole Mutual Aid, including writing a letter to the city that helped us win an award in the pre-ABC days. Would never happen now, of course. And they were dropping off support specifically for a migrant family, and in return, we had gifted them these little jars of homemade Nutella. And also in the middle, we have a picture of one of our fresh fruit pop-ups with free donations of fruit that were locally picked. That was locally picked thanks to the Fruit Tree Project, who has now become just like very central in terms of like some of the work that we're doing in terms of being a collaborator. And this one was a chai and future visioning for Marpole. There was an art activity that we did with people. And this is really special because I think what you see here is a glimpse of the people. There are a number of other people, including Filipinx and other neighbors, Black neighbors, Indigenous neighbors, etc. But I wanted to focus in on this because this is a moment that we caught of some Iranian and Afghan neighbors, laughing and talking and having just a great time sipping chai, and speaking in Farsi. And they also just really beautifully welcomed me in as a Pakistani. So, given the heartbreak we're seeing across the board, Iran and what's happening there, both internally in terms of people rising up against oppression, and of course, we see the, Western imperialist bombing, backed by Zionists, of course, and Israel off Iran as well. And we see Pakistan currently bombing Afghanistan yet again. But here we sat drinking chai. We debated who had the best kebabs. And I think I almost caused a fight by saying, some Pakistani food was better than some Iranian or Afghan. And then they debated back. And, just that beauty of being able to laugh together and sit as neighbors in this time of such difficulty and just shed, our skins of any kind of need to be in defense against each other or just for ourselves. So that has been deeply moving for me. And on the right, we have children from the Montessori school who teachers bring them in regularly, and they allowed us to share this picture in various ways on our social media channels. And what I love is that this is a private school and these children are learning really young, and they're always really keen and almost like pushing each other out of the way whenever they come to like get things into the pantry. And I think this really is such a beautiful beginning of collective care and the way that mutual aid can kind of permeate across different classes. So these are some photos. There are many more, but I, of course, had to narrow it down. So I wanted to also talk briefly about my practice in terms of curation and facilitation through a pedagogical approach of Freirean popular education. It's also been, central to my practice of collective care, tending to and tending with, tending together. And so the first example is from Reframing Relations. Oops, went a little too fast there. Let's do that again. Oops, I am going backwards. Imperfection, embracing it. So this is from Reframing Relations, which was a program started by Ronnie Dean Harris that I was a artist educator for a few years back, which paired Indigenous and settler facilitators to do arts-based workshops in community centers, but mostly in schools, including elementary and secondary. And I worked with many incredible collaborators. And this is one example where we fused our respective practices regarding land-based materials and reclaiming ancestral tongues for sessions with secondary school students. I often weave Urdu, one of my mother tongues, through my poetry. And this student, this is work that's in Cree, and this student shared that they haven't actually felt comfortable and have had negative responses when they, shared their Indigenous identity before in classrooms. And so this felt for them like a moment that was safe to be able to express themselves visually and while weaving in one of their languages through this kind of art expression. And so that felt really meaningful. And so these are pictures from the Empowering Women of Color conference at UC Berkeley, where I facilitated a workshop on decolonizing spirituality for Muslim women. And on the right, you can see this art activity that I led the participants through to vision our decolonial futures and all the kind of beautiful responses they had. In the middle, we have this moon with stars, futuristic moon with stars all around it. In the middle is a star that says Black Muslim recognition. We have people talking about returning, for Palestinians to return to their land and other kinds of like hopes and dreams for the future. On the left is a picture from Tomorrow is Ours. There's a showcase that we did. So this was after our Futurisms workshop series, where we had participants as young as 16 and as old as 75, and that's Vicky in the middle. And so this was a showcase that we got to do with the Versus Festival after, which was a really beautiful experience. And this picture, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge is something that is very meaningful for me. So after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, there was a lot of backlash also in terms of Islamophobia and a very difficult place for queer and trans Muslims to be. And the first people to reach out to comfort me and to check in were, Latinx femmes from the US that I had known. And so I reached out to people locally because the Pulse commemoration events or healing events that were happening around town or vigils were all being dominated by white people, and white people were speaking on our behalf. And so I reached out to a number of Latinx, Black and Indigenous folks and asked if we could come together to create a healing art space. And so this is a prayer corner that I created where people could just come and sit on prayer rugs, just hang out. They didn't have to pray. And we had food and different art creations. So that felt like a way of reclaiming a space where even our grief was being co-opted. And lastly, something super meaningful to me was Breaking the Fast, an annual arts showcase that I co-founded with other queer Muslims, and it centered the voices of gender marginalized and queer and trans Muslims. And also we had, performers that included children, we had poetry, we had dance artists, we had pretty much everything. Just a beautiful space that took place every year during Ramadan, hence the name Breaking the Fast. And this is a picture of the Heartwood Cafe looking in at our kind of what we called our horizontal or anti-oppressive Muslim prayer space with women, gender marginalized people, and of course, trans women are included, and non-binary people praying in the front and men praying behind us. And so, kind of I wouldn't say it's a new creation. It's a reclamation of traditions that have existed within Islam, but I think have sometimes been lost in mainstream kind of interpretations. So I thought, Claire, if it's okay, I could maybe play the azan here, if that works, briefly.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I actually can't pull that up, but so I had some tech difficulties finding the piece I wanted, but this is actually a recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. And for me, one of my healing practices and tending to myself is to listen to female Quran recitations. And I just wanted to play this briefly. Let's see if it works because on my phone, we're having to go low tech. I just thought this could be a moment I wanted to invite everyone to just, bring in a moment of embodiment because I've been speaking a lot. And if you feel comfortable, to kind of just sit back, ground in your body, and just let the audio take you where it takes you. And I'll play it briefly. This is Surah Al-Fatiha by Faratul Fairuza. من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين
أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Okay, so that was also a nod to the fact that at breaking the fast, Muslim women always called the azan and led the prayer. And for me, that was just really special and has continued to be something that I try to weave into some of my performances of poetry and poetry readings. So next up, I just have a few more slides. I wanted to talk about and shift to public art. And so this is uh, a public art installation that a collaboration that I did with Irv at Clayton Community Center. And we created a large-scale kinetic public art sculpture celebrating the racialized histories of Surrey and interconnected futures. And it featured archival imagery, as you can see, enlarged culturally relevant fabrics. We work with kente cloth and sari fabric and some beautiful Chinese and Japanese fabrics, amongst others, and hand-painted community mural of native plants, a custom design print. You can see, if I'm just pointing my arrow here, that was done by combining children's block prints and many other elements. You can see a territorial acknowledgement that is also there. This was designed to move with the ambient currents in the center, which is fairly new, and it was shown for a year. And the photo at the bottom center shows this incredible Afro-Caribbean family, multiple generations, who came and painted the native plant mural with us, as did many others. And so, bringing the community into public art and kind of breaking that false, which I consider a false binary between community engaged art, which is sometimes perceived by some people who I think are the art elite or maybe in art elitist circles as being very crafty and I don't want to say lowbrow, but not really high level art. So breaking the binary between that and public art, which is sometimes elevated at this other level, especially when it's like at a larger scale, where there's like funding for it and like competition processes that people have to go to. And sometimes as artists are competing with like architectural firms, etc., people with like years of MFAs, so forth. So I think this was a beautiful moment that I'm really proud of in terms of an installation, where we got to kind of dissolve that binary and create, I think, a new paradigm of working for us in particular. And all of the work for this installation was done by us in terms of the hand swaging, this hand sewing and the machine sewing, painting and collaboration with community, all of the research. The panels were designed so that they could move both interdependently and independently. And so kind of, signifying again, this collaborative kind of connection between communities, honoring the ways in which many Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities, including Chinese, Japanese, South Asian, have historically formed ties of kinship while tending to the collective web of care and also then moving independently and taking care of their own communities. And what was really beautiful is that we saw community members really see themselves in these histories. We had our beautiful art studio that we got to work out of. We opened up the doors completely. There were glass doors that slid open. And so we worked outside a fair bit. And I love that really dissolved that invisible wall that often exists in terms of the art institution that keeps so many people out looking in at art, but not actually feeling like it's theirs. And so just wanted to share that beautiful kind of example that to me also speaks to this concept of collective webs and care that happens between people. And so I wanted to move on to my last couple of slides. This is, I just have to talk about, there's just so much that one can pick from and it's hard to choose, of course, right? I'm not exactly a spring chicken. So through the many, many years that I've been around now, I've done a lot of things, but I just had to, really select these few photos from the downtown East Side residency in 29. Again, Irv and I collaborated on this. It was a year along with the Vancouver Parks Board Artists and Communities program in Carnegie Center. And it absolutely changed our lives. It was just the incredible talent, the deep webs of tenderness between people, the clustering and buffeting winds of gentrification, criminalization, poverty, colonialism, polycrisis, and more was just everything. It was just, there was so much to learn. We learned so much from people there. And this is a tiny glimpse of the many ways we jumped straight off multiple creative cliffs that we had never imagined, because that is, I think, what happens when you're in the downtown east side and when you're inspired by people who are displaying this kind of courage daily. A lot of like what happens in terms of Carnegie can at times be chaotic because there's just so much demand for services and space, and things happen at a very quick speed, but it was something that I'll never forget. And it just kind of, for me, became a seminal foundational moment in how I approached art after that as well. So on the bottom right, we have Oppenheimer Park, Indigenous Peoples Day. We have Indigenous kiddos and their dad from a tent nearby using these spray chalk stencils that we made, that were basically marking Indigenous territories. Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish, and naming them as unceded and unsurrendered. So this was just really beautiful. And on the top right is me with Priscilla, who's a DTES, if you don't know her, Indigenous Auntie icon and Carnegie board member that has a lot of different roles in the downtown east side, and just general, badass. She was on our selection committee, really put us through the ringer, but that was good. We appreciated that. And this is us making multilingual ultralight art banners with community members to tie to wheelchairs. They were carried by, popos and others. We specifically made them really accessible. And this was for an art show parade that went from Carnegie to Gallery Gachet, stopping at Oppenheimer along the way. And on the left is our performance of Tales of Shadow and Light. It was a shadow puppet play that we co-wrote with community members and that I directed, my first time directing a play. Let's just apparently put it right out there and have it be part of a big festival. Again, jumping off the creative cliff because community members just gave us the courage to do that. It was chaotic and it was brilliant. We had a standing ovation followed by a dance party around the space and a conga line, dancing to JB, the First Lady's music. This was a play about gentrification and displacement in Oppenheimer community and more. And on the left, you can see Priscilla, who was one of our main characters, Opiana, who was an Oppenheimer crow. And on the very right, you can see the number 20 bus, who was a character in the play, bringing kind of like a narrator and also an intervener in terms of justice on behalf of the community. So this was a beautiful kind of like fusion between downtown East Side community members and also students from UBC Exchange, including some students who had just recently come here to study from Hong Kong. And it was beautiful to have these collective conversations around what it was like to be living in an SRO and what was it like to be part of the student movement in Hong Kong, and so many other kind of, I think, fusings that happened between people that were just kind of beautiful to both witness and get to facilitate. All right. And of course, last but not least, I wanted to talk about, second to last, I guess, is Kwaya. So I'm just going to try to move through this a bit more quickly, noting the time. And so these two slides are just from kind of like the beginning of Kwaya's early days. And I am bringing in some highlights of how art and creative resistance has been a really kind of like trademark of Kwaya. We're known for embracing queer campiness, glitter right from the beginning, high impact graphics, banners, signs, three-dimensional props, art making for the streets, and always being unconventionally like vaudevillian and campy in everything that we do while being really serious in our messaging. And so this was really like a beautiful moment and very amusing because the theme of the Queer Film Festival that year, they were pink washing. This was the beginning of their pink washing years, was Films for Lovers and Fighters. And they had these hedgehogs as part of their branding. So we totally co-opted their branding and made these pink hedgehog signs and these hedgehog masks that we wore. And they were so great that people actually thought we were part of the festival. And so they took our flyers. We had great conversations with people. And just, I think there's something about like engaging with people with that kind of like, campiness and bringing that kind of flair that makes you much more approachable. And so that was a strategy that worked really well for us. This is, of course, us being invited after this in the early years of the campaign to get VQFF to sign on to PAC-B and BDS. We were invited to Brazil for the first World Social Forum, Free Palestine, historic, that's never happened before, by Al-Qaus, one of the seminal queer and Palestinian organizations based out of Palestine. And of course, you can see here that we have Angela Davis and her partner Gina Dent in the middle with the banner, with all of us posing, Palestinians, Lebanese, folks from everywhere, Iranians, from across actually the world, because it was we were brought together for this anti-pinkwashing gathering. And this is also us at the same location in Brazil during the Great March that happened. And this was really beautiful because people love the banners so much. And they love, again, it's pink, purple lame. We took a lot of time picking out this material. You can see the precision that's gone into it in terms of like how it's made. It's been measured. It's been done perfectly, but it's, again, glittery. You can't see the glitter as much here, but it's like really shiny. And so all along the march that happened in Porto Alegre in Brazil with like just so many people, we couldn't even walk like 1 foot without being stopped by people for photos, and often really like these macho seeming reporters and men, and we were like, oh, they're going to hate this banner, they're going to say something, but they were like, we love your banner, please stop. And we're like, we have to march, but they just couldn't get enough of it. And later we were reported in the Israeli press as, I believe, queens against Israeli apartheid, which was also perfect. So this is an example of something else we made in Kwaya. This is a puppet of Avigdor Lieberman, who was a backpack. This is a backpack puppet. The foreign minister at the time of It's Not Real. And again, was something that proved to be really a way to bring satire into the situation without, of course, in any way diminishing the seriousness of the genocide that has been happening all along in terms of Palestine. From Israel. And this allowed, again, people to approach us. And we were approached by people who I think wouldn't have approached us if we'd just been using a megaphone and doing speeches, because it brought in this level of creativity, playfulness, but also like a message that couldn't be ignored. And so Avigdor traveled across the city, often dodging bus lines and other things because he was very tall, and really was super effective. So just again, wanted to mention the banner and how it's been, is now a living archive and also been a site of resistance, standing here with Indigenous land defenders in 2021 during the first block boat actions that happened in the city before 2023. And this banner has also stood down riot police and cops with Palestinian youth and other youth with precarious status taking shelter behind it when we were faced with riot police with our rifles and dogs after one particular protest. And I think what I wanted to say about that before I move to the next slide is that a lot of times Zionists and cops and, repressive forces don't know what to do with the banner because it brings out people's, I think, campiness and playfulness, whether they're queer or straight or, anywhere across various spectrums of gender and identity. They don't know what to do because it's something that threatens them. They're not sure if they should take it seriously or not, but it kind of, I think, just kind of gets under their skin with its blatant campiness. These are just some examples of art. On the right is our patches, brilliant screen printing by Rome, who's a screen printing, genius, and buttons and collaborations we did for merch, fundraising merch. And on the top left is a piece of art I did also for Kwaya fundraising for the Samir Project and migrant workers in Lebanon. So just to share, 100% of our profits always go to fundraisers that are being done for Palestinians and other people in the region. And the Chinga La Migra also fundraised for Latinx, queer and trans group in the US. And just circling back, to earlier times, probably around, I think, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, Kwaya was also at the time part of, and for many years, part of the coalitions that were happening around Palestine solidarity. And before, things like Parents for Palestine, which is a great group. And people weaving in the neat understanding that we needed to like have things for children, particularly at these events. This was something that we did at the art gallery many, many years ago, where we basically had art making and signs, and a lot of children joined us and did handprints. And we were really thinking through how we kept seeing children at the protests, but they had no way of really processing their trauma. And they were just there standing around having to listen to speech after speech. And we wanted to engage both them and the public. So yet another way that art making for Kwaya has been so central in bringing in people beyond preaching to the converted as a strategy, and also as a way of healing and tending to. So this is going to, I think, be my last slide. And I just wanted to speak about, just going to catch up with my notes. I wanted to talk for a moment about the poem as riot, as invocation, as conjuring, as incantation. And so what does that mean? For me, what it has meant is that a number of my poems have been shared on the streets and on front lines, on corners during, for example, BLM, when they were the Grand Marshals for the Dyke March. So, blocking intersections and taking them up. And at rallies and different events. And a few of them have incited white people to almost riot, to threaten me. I've had to be escorted to my, vehicle before. People have threatened reverse racism, human rights complaints. I consider all of that a badge of honor. And so I wanted to talk about an example of the journey of one poem, Name Me Rebel, from stage to front line to page. And that's what these pictures are showing. And so originally this poem, Name Me Rebel, was commissioned by the organizing committee for the 𝙩𝙚𝙣𝙙 Centennial with the Vancouver International Bhangra Festival. And the 𝙩𝙚𝙣𝙙 Centennial, the 𝙩𝙚𝙣 movement was an incredible anti-colonial, interfaith, South Asian movement in support of Indian independence that spanned the Pacific Northwest, India, and also other countries, including the Philippines. And the poem focuses on the forgotten stories of the women of 𝙩𝙚𝙣 and Muslims while weaving in the Palestinian struggle, 1981, the Gujarat pogroms, Modi, and much more. It was inspired by 𝙩𝙚𝙣 poetry, which was a critical way to communicate while under surveillance by, the state. And the poetry was a clarion call for the revolution. And so this was read at first in front of direct descendants at the Centennial and others in a packed audience in Surrey. And this is a photo of me, if middle at the top, in the center, with one of the performers and other Sikh youth after the performance. And then on the left is the poem On Front Lines at a protest against Modi and Harper when they had come to town to visit the historic Ross Street Khalsa Diwan Gurdwara, which historically was a site for the 𝙩𝙚𝙣𝙙 movement and of revolutionary meetings. And so people, especially in the Sikh community, but also Muslims joined and many others, were outraged that Modi in particular was being allowed into this space by the Gurdwara Association. And so the first three lines in the sign on the bottom right, you can see on the left, are from this poem, Name Me Rebel. On the very top is a Sikh elder. There were many Sikh elders. She's using a mobility scooter, and there were snipers on the roof, cops from multiple units, extremely aggressive, taunting and threatening us if we even dared to set 1 foot off the sidewalk. And on the very bottom left is me with Audrey Siegel, who's Musqueam activist and organizer that I'm sure you know, who's very well loved and respected. And we're at the protest at the intersection right before you go into the Gurdwara. And so there's just some other pictures of me performing the poem at Breaking the Fast, a nod to Gulab Kaur, who is one of the women who is mentioned in the poem. And then the poem was eventually then solicited by Capilano Review for their translingual issue. So just this journey, that happened, that was very interesting, which kind of brings in the page, the stage, and front lines. And I was hoping that if it's possible, just to take a couple minutes to read the poem and then end there, if that works, Claire.
Yeah, go ahead, Amal.
Okay. Let me just pull it up. So the original Gadar poems that served as inspiration, I'm going to just read them in English just because of time. They are also in Hindi and Punjabi, but I'll just read them in English for now. So the first excerpt is from Kartar Singh Sarhaba, and it's called If They Ask You Who You Are. If they ask you who you are, tell them your name is rebel, that your occupation is to wipe out tyranny, that your work is to create Gadar, that this is your namaz and your sandaya, that this is the way you worship, that this is your only true religion, that this is your Khuda, that this is your Ram. So namaz and sandaya are respectively referring to Muslim and Hindu rituals of prayer. Khuda is the way Muslims refer to God, and Ram, of course, is a major Hindu deity. This is a translation by Ali Mir. And then I have one more excerpt of a Gadar poem, and then I will read mine. Freedom is not obtained by begging. By appeals, political power is not won. Do not petition like cowards. Take the sword, and they will run. What have all the petitions done? The cruel foreigners have eaten our homeland. So I'm going to read my poem now. Name me rebel. Name me rebel. Name me ashes rising from the phoenix. Name me Besharam Aurat, dangerous transgressor, too demanding for the cause, too emotional. Name me sweetheart, butchy, dear, beautiful, abhorrent, deviant, unbeliever. Name me Shahrazad's tongue-turned rebel, forking out in 1,001 ways, dethroning the self-appointed gatekeepers of morality and imperial emperors crowned with laurels made from drones. This is the time for a puja of accounting. Call forth the butcher of Gujarat, masquerading in the robes of democracy. This is the time for Inqilabi namaz led by women, demanding justice for their sisters, for 1984. This is the time for Khadija's pen, Aisha's warrior ululations, striking fear in the hearts of men. This is the time of the sword, blading its way through your silence, the erasing of so many histories into tales of male rebels. When they ask you who I am, tell them I am the forgotten lover, appa, ammi, dadi, nani, mami, chachi, khala, beti, who nurtured the heart, soul, body, mind, spirit of all the Ashfaqullah Khans, Bhagat Singhs, Sukhdevs, Azads, and Rajgurus. Tell them I am the mother who fed the men who made the history books. Men whose photos hang at revolutionary melas with only a tiny handful of women. Tell them I am the forgotten women of the Komagata Maru, Inqilabi spirits still wandering the floor of the Salish Sea. Tell them my name is Durga Bhabi, Kartar Dilan, Gulab Kaur, Bikaji Kama. Tell them my name is not just Malala, but also Momina Bibi murdered by an American drone. Afia Siddiqui, Asia Bibi. Ask them why they claim to speak for us, but refuse to say our names. Tell them my name is much more than rebel. My name is life. The seal, not of Solomon, but Bilqis. An armed uprising of Jannat's Huris, shredding apart your Orientalist dreams and their feigned piety. My name is rebellion's lightning, my tongue Azadi's forge, because freedom cannot be won by begging. Oh, sisters, my resistors, when they ask you who you are, tell them your name is not just rebel. Your name is a burning in every pind, a raging in every sheher, a fever in every child's veins, a storming of every jail, a flooding of every river, a reawakening in every masjid, gurdwara, and mandir. the raid of 1,000 Jallianwala Baghs, the resilient roots of global uprisings, from Gaza to Manila to Lahore, Ambala, and Jammu, to the unceded coasts of Turtle Island, a birthing of all the revolutions that have gone and all those to come. Your name carries entire oceans and seas. Your name is a vastness so deep, the colonizers froth with fear. Your name burns indelible, coals beneath the ashes, our forgotten sisters breathing life into new flames of Gaddar. Thanks, everyone.